Indianapolis is pretty awesome. It's my first time here. Thanks to everyone who's put on the con. Volunteers, you guys are awesome. It's amazing the explosion of local hacker cons we have lately. He just mentioned DerbyCon, there's GurCon, HushCon. We've even seen the return of SummerCon lately, which was an old school con. And of course we have all the B-sides happening everywhere. Every week it seems like there's a new one. It kind of reminds me of the old days of XCon and RaveCon and HavocCon and HoHoCon. And of course PumpCon, except that PumpCon is still happening. All those other ones have kind of died by the wayside. And Philadelphia, of course, which is where PumpCon is lovely in October. Well, not really. Philadelphia isn't lovely at any time of year. But if you're going to go, you might as well go for a HackerCon. So come to PumpCon. That way I don't have to travel to see you all. Well, I love PumpCon since I've been attending since I think like 96 or 95. My very first HackerCon. How many people, this is your first HackerCon ever? Good. My first HackerCon was HoHoCon in 1992, which was held in a Motel 6, I think. It's a bit different than this place. It was in Houston, and we had presentations on Van Eck phreaking, people breaking into government systems looking for information on UFOs. Don Draper was there, aka Captain Crunch. He was screaming about everyone who was smoking in the conference room, which you could do back then. The hotel manager barged in. I remember he barged in during the middle of a talk, and he threatened to throw us all out, and we threatened to countersue him for a breach of contract lawsuit. So, you know, it was good times, good times. But I was reminded of a lot of these old cons when I was looking at the CircleCityCon website. And I guess, I mean, everybody saw that, right? It was a pretty awesome website. And if you don't recognize the motif, it was written to look like it was running on a DOS program, which for some reason, it kind of reminded me of my days punching away on a Commodore 64, which actually weren't that many. I spent many more days punching away on a Commodore PET, which, for those of you who remember, had a black and green screen and not the funky color screen that the 64 had. But that's what I had to use in high school back in the dark ages. We didn't have those fancy schmancy floppy drives either. Nothing but the best cassette tapes for our students. Yeah, comma 8, comma 1. Those early hacking years were really kind of crazy, right? No one really understood what this computer thing was. And as a result, people were afraid of it. I mean, they were really afraid of it. In fact, in 1990, the Secret Service raided a small independent role-playing game called Steve Jackson Games. Some of you may have heard of it. Thinking that the game they were developing at the time, Grupp's Cyberpunk, was actually in fact real. And it was a den of cybercrime. Of course, they didn't call it cybercrime back then, or maybe they did, I don't think so. But this, of course, was nowhere near the truth. The truth was that the author of the game, Lloyd Blankenship, was simply researching computer security and hacking techniques in order to provide a more realistic atmosphere for his game. The Secret Service raided not only Lloyd Blankenship's home, but also the office of his employer, Steve Jackson Games, for no other reason than that was where he worked. I mean, that's how scared they were. I mean, it's easy to look back on those shenanigans now. Ha ha ha, Secret Service. What a bunch of incompetent jerks, right? Raiding the offices of a role-playing game, thinking it was a den of evil hackers. And it would be funny if it was an isolated incident, if the government put its fear aside and actually learned from its mistakes. Unfortunately, that's not really the case. Frack Magazine, for those of you that don't know, was one of the main ways hackers communicated in the 80s and 90s, by publishing information that was then widely disseminated to bulletin board systems around the world. Well, one of the editors of Frack, Night Lightning, aka Craig Niedorf, he got himself arrested after Frack published a document on the enhanced 911 system. Bell South claimed that the published document was full of trade secrets and was valued at over $80,000. This meant that Night Lightning was facing a possible 30 years in jail for simply publishing a document. A document that was later found to be being offered for sale by Bell South for $13. Yeah, $80,000 valuation. Well, it seems that they had to reach a certain dollar value to get the FBI involved. And so to pump up the valuation of this document, they included the cost of the VAX computer system that the document was written on, and the salary of the secretary who wrote it up. They didn't really understand. They were afraid and they overreacted. The authorities were so afraid of Kevin Poulsen, the journalist at Wired, who in a previous lifetime was pretty notorious. He had been in and out of DoD systems with the handle Dark Dante. The authorities were so afraid of Kevin that when he was finally released from prison after being held for 5 years without bail, his sentence included a ban on all internet access for 3 years because they were afraid of what they thought he could do. Can you imagine today, no internet at all for 3 years? And then, of course, during Kevin Mitnick's trial, the prosecutor claimed that Kevin could whistle modem tones into a phone and start World War III. This got Kevin sent to solitary confinement for an unconscionably long time. The prosecutors may have known it wasn't true. They probably got the idea after watching David Lightman make free phone calls in the movie War Games. Either way, the prosecutor was scared of what he didn't know, and Kevin paid the price for it. In 1995, Edward Cummings, known to most people as Bernie S., was arrested for possession of a Radio Shack tone dialer. I almost said Rat Shack. Everybody remembers that, right? If you don't remember, a tone dialer was a small box that made DTMF tones, dual tone, multi-frequency, that you could dial a telephone with. And it was sold at Radio Shack, who are now out of business. The thing was that the one that Bernie S. had didn't even work. But the official charges stated that it could be used for criminal activity. They were afraid, and so Bernie wound up in jail. More recently, there was Weave, a.k.a. Andrew Auernheimer, a.k.a. Rabbi, a.k.a. a vile and despicable human being, who would probably get a great kick out of knowing that I said all that. But for all intents and purposes, Andrew basically just manipulated a URL in a web browser. Something I would hazard to guess that everyone in this room has done at least once. I know I do it at least once a day. Despite Weave living in Arkansas at the time, or is it Arkansas? I don't know how to pronounce that. And the AT&T server whose URL he changed was in California, I think. He was charged in New Jersey because, well, the data traveled through New Jersey to get to California. Weave was charged and convicted and sentenced to 3.5 years in jail. 3.5 years for simply changing a URL. Tell me that wasn't motivated by fear. Thankfully, his awesome lawyer, Oren Kerr, got his conviction vacated on the basis that the venue in New Jersey wasn't proper. But, I mean, you say Weave is a troll. And if he didn't deserve the sentence for manipulating a URL, he surely did far worse things to people to be worthy of being in jail. How about Hector Monsignor, who you probably know of as Sabu? Yeah, he was a snitch, and he turned against all his LSEC buddies. But why? Why did he drop a dime on him? Because law enforcement threatened to take his daughter away and send him to jail for 30 years. And not that I'm forgiving his actions, but that's a lot of pressure to put on a father. And what about Aaron Swartz, who basically manipulated a URL to download public documents? He was facing $1 million fine and 30 years in jail before he decided he couldn't take the pretrial pressure anymore and committed suicide. Most drug dealers get 3 to 5 years in jail after they've been convicted. Unless, of course, you deal your drugs on that scary place known as the internet. Oh, excuse me, the dark web. Because, you know, if they called it rainbows and unicorns web, it wouldn't be scary. You wouldn't be afraid of it. And you wouldn't get life in prison for selling stuff that is actually legal in some states. But the internet isn't a state. Of course, these few examples are only the high-profile cases which have made decent-sized splashes in the news. There are dozens of other cases where someone became afraid of a hacker and reacted inappropriately. For example, the 8-year-old in Florida last month, he changed the desktop background on his teacher's computer and was charged with a felony. Or the security researcher who you just heard from, who made an innocuous tweet on an airplane and freaked everyone the hell out. So much so that the FBI had to warn the TSA to be on the lookout for people who look like hackers because, you know, we all have purple hair and nose rings and stickers on our laptops. And now the government is crying out for us hackers to come work for them. Help protect our country from the axis of evil that is now inhabiting cyberspace and launching millions of attacks against our infrastructure every second. Please protect us from the cyber influx that is China or Russia or Iran or whoever we don't like today. You see, the governments are not only afraid of us, they are experts at peddling fear and making other people afraid as well. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that most of this happened long, long ago. We are hackers of the modern age. We are security researchers. You think the government no longer fears us. They covet us. They want us to work for them. They constantly claim how they don't have enough people to fill cybersecurity positions at I gotta watch where those periods are. They constantly claim how they don't have enough people to fill cybersecurity positions. GCHQ, which is basically England's NSA, just last month said they wanted to hire people with a, quote, keen interest in code breaking and ethical hacking, unquote. I'm not even going to get into that whole ethical mess. The U.S. Army has said that they may consider relaxing physical requirements for soldiers who work in, quote, cyber, unquote. The FBI has said the same about possibly removing the drug test requirements for its cyber hires. But don't let this fool you. They really don't want you to work with them. They don't want real hackers anyway. They don't want people who are curious, self-taught, who actually hang out with other hackers at hacker cons. They fear real hackers because they fear what they can't control. What they want are graduates of NSA-approved programs like the National Center for Academic Excellence in Information Assurance and Cyber Defense. They want graduates of NSA-approved programs like the National Centers of Academic Excellence in Information Assurance and Cyber Defense. NCAEIACD. They ran out of three-letter acronyms, I guess. They want people who dutifully pay their CISSP dues. People who don't associate with known hackers, which if you're a CISSP person, you probably shouldn't be here. But don't let anybody take your picture. People who have conformed to their way of thinking. People they are not afraid of. The current situation reminds me of a book I once read. Actually, hang on. It is dry up here. Is the air dry in Indy? I know it was raining today. Is that a hint as to the booze? Yeah, that burger. I mean, it was all right. Not for $15, all right, but it was all right. All right. So this whole thing reminds me of a book I once read. You may have seen the prequel that was made into a movie called Ender's Game. Well, in one of the follow-up books, Shadow of the Hegemon by Orson Scott Card, which, if you decide to read it, I encourage you to do so in a way that contributes 0 pennies to Mr. Card's bigoted pockets. Yeah, go Google him and you'll see what I'm talking about. Or don't, I don't care. He's a bigot. Anyway, in Shadow of the Hegemon, the book is actually pretty good, despite the man who wrote it. Ender has defeated the Formics and has prevented the future invasion of Earth. Huh? You're interrupting me. No heckling. Especially from you. Oh yeah, all right. We're not going there. Anyway. In the Shadow of the Hegemon in the book, Ender has defeated the Formics and prevented a future invasion of Earth. With the threat neutralized, all the graduates of the specially constructed battle school returned to Earth. But while in battle school, they had learned every tactic, every trick, every military strategy known. They had studied the movements of Caesar, Napoleon, Washington, Churchill, Patton, Rommel, and Sun Tzu, who I only include here to piss off a certain group of people. You know who you are. But the battle school students were experts at all military tactics, having honed their skills through years of simulated attacks against the Formics and in actual practice in the battle room of the battle school. Upon their return to Earth, these students became highly prized commodities among the individual powers on planet Earth. Each nation wanted to have its own battle school graduate at the head of its army. The students were kidnapped, held for ransom, and the nations of the world fought over them. That is, until the hegemon took control and settled things. Of course, the analogy here is that we, hackers, are the students of the battle school. We are the experts in our field and highly prized by governments and corporations around the world. But Ender's Game, that's fiction. But the current situation also reminds me of something that is not fiction. The breakup of Germany after World War II and the scramble between the Allied powers to repatriate German citizens. The United States launched Operation Paperclip and grabbed dozens of German chemists, physicists, and most importantly, rocket scientists. The most famous of which, Wernher von Braun, helped found the NASA. That's a Freudian slip. The Russians were not left out. They grabbed a sizable chunk of German academia for themselves and the space race and the Cold War were born. So how long until hackers, security researchers, find themselves targets of government or corporate control, whether they want to be or not? How long until security researchers, good security researchers, hackers, become a commodity that governments and companies feel they must control? I'm not just talking about the United States here. There are a lot of players in this cyber Cold War, or the new cyberspace race. We've already seen companies file lawsuits against each other when a valuable security employee decides to change allegiance and work for someone else. How long until countries start banning security researchers from crossing borders? Will security researchers be detained by another country when you cross their borders? It's understood in intelligence communities that nuclear scientists in Iran have been targeted for assassination. How long until one country tries to assassinate another country's hackers? A long time ago, like 4 lifetimes ago, I used to work as a mall cop. Yeah, I was Paul Blatt. Minus the segue. Something I learned, though, during that job was that the only reason I even had a job was because the owners of the mall were afraid. They were afraid of fights breaking out, afraid of lawsuits, afraid of gangs. I should mention that this mall was in Downtown Crossing in Boston, Massachusetts, Lafayette Place, if anybody remembers it. I think it's got torn down now. Which in the early 90s wasn't in the best of neighborhoods, bordering on Boston's notorious combat zone. But really, it was this fear of bad things happening that paid my check every week. Fear is about the only way you can sell security, regardless of whether that is physical security or cybersecurity, because if people aren't afraid, they aren't going to buy security. Unfortunately, most companies are not afraid enough. For large corporations, the cost of getting breached is the cost of doing business. The large data breach that hit Target cost them $162 million, which seems like an obscene amount of money. It seems like an obscene amount of money until you realize that Target paid $1.2 billion in dividends on $21.8 billion in sales for 2014. A data breach that only costed $162 million? An argument could be made that it's actually cheaper for companies to get breached than it is to spend any money on security. The internet has gone through 4 major phases since its inception, in my opinion. What I call the birthing years, from the late 60s to the late 70s, basically saw communication through email and FTP. Those 2 protocols were so prolific, so prevalent, that you could actually send commands to an FTP server and receive files back simply by sending an email. In the 1980s, we saw the beginnings of Usenet, and the internet as it had been known changed. Email and FTP were still around, but Usenet became the dominant application, with Usenet groups for every conceivable topic, like Alt Ensign Wesley, die, die, die. Or Alt Barney Dinosaur, die, die, die. Wait, where's the dinosaur? Oh, he's still alive, okay. And of course, more serious groups like CompSysMatCom or Rec Auto Saturn. In 1993, it was the beginning of the end for Usenet, with the introduction of the Mosaic browser, and the web as we know it was born. Along with the HTTP protocol, we added online shopping and banner ads, and of course live streaming video. And just 8 years ago, in 2007, we saw the start of the next phase of the internet, the death knell of the web, the introduction of the first truly smartphone. A phone which, at the time, came with unlimited all-you-can-eat data. It wasn't long before the hyperlinked web as we knew it started to get eroded away, and in its place, multiple walled gardens, silos of individual apps. Want to send an email? There's an app for that. Want to read the news? There's an app for that. Want to shop online? There's an app for that for every single store. Along with these mobile devices, we saw the erosion of our neatly defined networks. We used to know what systems were on our networks, well, assuming we bothered to count them, which we still don't do. Our networks had known entry points, and we knew where what we controlled began and what we controlled ended. Mobile and cloud has changed all that. For all the talk of BYOD and the coming security apocalypse, mobile devices have actually reduced the risk for most corporations. Sure, it was a little touch and go at first, as old school network admins realized that the perimeter as they knew it was gone, and that the number of endpoints on their network had just magically tripled. It was constantly changing. But we eventually got the hang of it, and now, thanks to smartphones, we have basically removed root from the user's hands. There are no more admin accounts on end-user accessible devices, well, assuming you don't jailbreak it. We stopped trusting the user to do the right thing. We stopped trusting the user to not click shit. Instead, we realize that the user is going to click shit. The user is going to accidentally do bad things, and there is nothing we can do to stop it. There is nothing we can do to change what the user will do. Instead, mobile has accepted the fact that the user does not know best. The user is going to fuck shit up. There's that PG-13 rating. Because, well, that's what users do. It's our job as security professionals to realize this, to plan for this, to manage that risk, and realize that bad shit happens. IT admins have known this for years. IT people know that users are going to pour beer into their laptops, or get them stolen, or let their kids play with them and end up deleting their hard drives. True stories all. IT has accepted these risks. They have planned for them. When a machine dies, for whatever reason, they grab a new one, restore from backup, and get back to business. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, no big deal. Why can't security do this? Why can't we accept the risk that we are going to be breached? That personally identifiable information is going to get leaked? That our credit card database is going to get exposed no matter how PCI compliant we are? When bad shit happens, why can't we as security professionals stand up and say, yes, I knew this would happen. I planned for this. Here's what we need to do. Yes, we still need to apply our patches. We still need to read our logs and check our firewall rules and scan for bad email attachments and run antivirus on our machine. The same basic fundamental shit that we've been preaching for the last 20 or so years. We need to do all that and more. But why can't we also plan for when bad shit happens? And so by not trusting the user and not giving them the ability to do bad things, we have. Yeah, it took us a while to get there. It took us a while to figure out how to secure 3 times the devices on the same budget. But that's our job. That's what we get paid to do. We keep banging our heads against the wall trying to fix the same problems over and over again. For decades now. They're saying the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Well, isn't that sort of what we are doing in InfoSec? We can't keep creating organizations that talk the good talk, take all of our money, and yet don't actually do anything except make top 10 lists. We can't keep preaching about how easy it is to solve SQLI and then not actually solve it. We've been trying and failing for over 20 years to solve technically trivial problems. We cannot waste another 20 years with the same failed education and awareness campaigns. It's time that we took security out of the hands of the user as much as possible and build as much safety in as we can, and then plan to quickly recover when the inevitable happens. And now I'm going to make a car analogy. Pause for groan from audience. Thank you. Car safety is now inherently safer today than it was when I was a child, which was, I guess, Model T, something like that. Why? Because we realized we can't prevent car crashes. No matter how much training someone has, someone is still not going to follow the rules and is going to make a sudden swerve across 4 lanes of traffic so they can make their exit. It's going to happen. And so we build in safety. We design safer roads. We add safety features to vehicles like seatbelts and anti-lock brakes, airbags. We mandate crumple zones. And in 10 years, we're going to have self-driving drone cars. Car accidents will be basically a thing of the past because we will have taken the responsibility of driving out of the hands of the user. Now we just need to figure out how to get self-driving internet drones so we can take security out of the hands of the user. We keep talking about this cost of security and how companies need to spend money to make sure they're more secure. There's been a lot of talk about how the IRS hasn't been spending enough on security. Almost as if there's some magic dollar amount that when you reach it, boom, you're suddenly secure. The key, obviously, isn't how much a company spends on security. The key is spending it in the right place. The key is making sure that the people actually doing the work of securing the company are doing the fundamental basic shit that we have known about for years. Are they enforcing password strength rules? Do they even have password strength rules? Are passwords being stored encrypted and properly salted? Have all the default accounts been removed or at least passwords changed? Have all patches been applied? Not just to the operating system, but also the applications, the BIOSes. And let's not forget to patch the switches. We always forget to patch the damn switches. Are your anti-malware signatures up to date on all your machines? Do you even know what all your machines are? When was the last time anyone reviewed the firewall rules? And the logs. Don't forget the logs. Log everything. Read them, analyze them, correlate them, crunch the shit out of your logs. This is basic fundamental shit that we've been preaching and preaching and preaching for the last 20 years. Protect your passwords, patch, read your logs. It used to be that all this basic stuff required manpower, and it still does. But today we have the technology. Most of this stuff can be automated. We have automatic deployment of anti-malware signatures. We have application whitelisting systems. We have patch management systems, vulnerability scanning systems. And most importantly, we now have systems to tie them all together. We have systems that check up on other systems to make sure that they did what they say they did. Did all those patches get rolled out successfully? Well, now you can have multiple systems checking up on each other to make sure that the system you spent all those dollars on is actually doing what it told you it did. And speaking of logs, you're spending a fortune on that external threat intelligence crap, which, seriously, it isn't very intelligent in most cases. I mean, most of the time it's just a list of malware signatures and bad IP addresses. You're spending a fortune on the external threat intelligence, and yet you have a virtual gold mine of it sitting right there on your own network for free. And you don't use it. Crunch the shit out of your logs. Will doing all this basic stuff keep you secure? Will you suddenly become breach-proof? No. You're still going to get breached. But now you'll find out about it before Brian Krebs. You'll at least be able to contain the problem before you lose millions of credit card numbers or all your company's intellectual property or a list of your employees who have security clearances. At least now you'll be able to develop a plan on how to contain the breach and how to reconstitute your networks afterwards. 2 weeks ago, Steve Werby at RVASec, at least I think it was Steve Werby. I wasn't at RVASec. I read this on a tweet, so maybe it was somebody else. Anyway, someone there said that in 18 months, half of what you know about security will be obsolete. And I agree. But the other half of what you know about security, that will never change. That's the fundamental basics that we have known about since pretty much when we started this thing. And for some reason, we just fail at doing them. Securing your own organization is important work. But our world is now so much bigger than just our own little networks. Hackers, security researchers used to live in our own little IRC channels, talking amongst ourselves. That world is changing quickly. The echo chamber, as we have become fond of calling it, has grown. There are outsiders among us, and they are listening and carrying our message beyond our little world. And while they may get the terminology wrong and say stuff like cyber at the wrong time, causing those of us who never graduated high school to still giggle in the back row as if the teacher said a naughty word, they mean well. But the problem with all things cyber, as in cyber war, is that no one involved knows the rules. And even more dangerous, no one knows for sure who anyone else is. Attribution is hard. So hard as you might as well roll the attribution dice. Or ask the attribution 8-ball. We still don't really know who did the Sony attack. Sure, the U.S. government says they know it was the North Koreans. But did they do the deed themselves, or did the North Koreans hire the Russians? Or someone else? Or maybe it was someone else entirely. A false flag operation, or just random online miscreants. I mean, people have been in and out of the Sony networks for almost a decade. Just how is the U.S. government so damn sure it was the North Koreans? I was recently quoted as saying that the last time that Hollywood got both the movie and the technology correct was 1992 Sneakers. And really, that movie has become a lot more prophetic than I think they thought it would be when they made it. In the movie, you have multiple world powers fighting over the technology to keep or reveal secrets. And the hackers are caught in the middle. One awesome line from that movie: the world isn't run by weapons anymore, or energy, or money. It's run by little ones and zeros, little bits of data. It's all just electrons. Here we are 23 years later, and that quote is a lot more true now than it was then. Whoever attacked Sony, there was definitely a reaction from the highest levels of government. The President of the United States, one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful person in the world, bent down into our little world of online drama and issued some executive orders in an effort to try and calm government fear and get control of this cyber thing. Well, those executive orders themselves may not have had that big of an effect directly. Their indirect impact has been huge. Cyber is now the hot topic in Washington. And this little breach over at the Office of Personnel Management has done nothing but fan the flames. Lawmakers are introducing new cyber bills on an almost daily basis. Some would say that they are taking a shotgun approach and hoping that one of their efforts sticks. Most of these bills are harebrained, half-baked ideas that would do way more harm than good. Thankfully, most won't ever make it out of committee. But it's not really the lawmakers' fault. They just don't know any better. They listen to their lobbyists, the supposed experts who tell them that they think is best. Your elected official then goes and writes a bill. That bill might actually solve a problem if it gets passed, or not. It may be a good bill that will make a great law, or not. But it has cyber in the title. And cyber is hot right now, and maybe it will get them appearance on Meet the Press. After the movie War Games in 1984, the awareness of hackers in popular culture dramatically increased. Break-ins into government computer systems suddenly became a national priority. Out of nothing more than fear, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, with its overreaching and vague clauses, was passed. The law is overreaching and vague because they really didn't know what they were trying to protect, other than a protected computer. They were just afraid and wanted to protect everything, regardless of the harm that was caused as well. And now, of course, we have this breach at the Office of Personnel Management, a breach that was foreshadowed by similar breach at USIS and Key Management and even Anthem. At this point, whether the cause was a lack of spending on security or bad policies or poor network design is irrelevant. It's easy to sit here and play blame the victim anyway, which is something that we seem to do a lot of in this industry. If your car gets robbed because you left it unlocked and parked in a bad neighborhood, the cops don't go throw you in jail or even give you a ticket. And your insurance company is still going to pay you. But if you fail to properly salt and hash your passwords or encrypt your data or even accidentally click a link in a phishing email, then suddenly the network breach was your fault. You deserved it. You were asking for it, or you had it coming. But regardless of who is to blame for OPM, we can definitely expect some sort of reaction. The long prophesized and feared cyber Pearl Harbor is here. Assuming, of course, that Pearl Harbor wasn't the defacing of the New York Times by hacking for girlies, or Gary McKinnon routing through NASA systems, threatening to disrupt at the highest levels, or the however many defacements there have been of Army.mil, another one last week, I've lost count. If Cyber Pearl Harbor wasn't Heartland or Home Depot the second time, or Target or Anthem, then surely it must be this breach at OPM. Of course, the original attack on Pearl Harbor claimed over 2,500 lives and drew the United States into World War II, costing almost 300,000 American combat deaths and untold enemy and civilian casualties. The attack on OPM has cost 0 lives so far. However, history may show that the cyber Pearl Harbor attack that was the OPM and the exfiltration of information on all Americans with a security clearance to be just as impactful as the original attack on Pearl Harbor. The Wassenaar Agreement on export controls for conventional arms and dual-use goods and technologies, it's another long acronym, or simply Wassenaar, takes this war on hackers even further. Wassenaar proposes a blanket ban on software specially designed or modified to defeat protective countermeasures of a computer or network-capable device, which is such a broad definition to include many of the tools that we use every day. Many of the tools that are used strictly for defensive purposes. If you use an auditing tool to check the strength of your passwords, it may become illegal under the Wassenaar Agreement. Laws such as this are already on the books in places like Germany, which has criminalized the creation and possession of dual-use security tools. My point is that we, as hackers, regardless of the color of your hat, or if you operate on offense or defense, or simply call yourself a security researcher, we can no longer operate as if the rest of the physical world did not exist. We are part of that world, and that world is part of ours. Sure, you have organizations like the EFF and the Centers for Democracy and Technology, and Access Now, and Public Knowledge, and many others, and they all do good work to a point. But all of these organizations come with baggage, their own agendas, their own lobbying groups, and they may not always speak for you. And when they do speak, it is but one voice among many. Sure, that voice may be a little louder than others, maybe, maybe not, but it's still just one voice. The internet, for all intents and purposes, is ours. Those of us in this room. No, we don't actually own it, but it's where we live and work and play, is where we talk and laugh and love. And while the same can be said for many people, not just hackers, we are the ones who know how it all works. We are the ones who know just how fragile it all is. And we are the ones who fix it when it breaks and break it when it needs fixing. We should also be the ones deciding how it is governed. We live in an era where one voice can be amplified infinitely and heard around the world in minutes. Take advantage of that capability. If we are ever going to speak up, now is the time to do it. The internet is changing. Our world is changing, and we need to change with it. Edward Snowden said recently in an op-ed for the New York Times that we are witnessing the emergence of a post-terror generation. While that may be true, we are also witnessing the emergence of an always connected generation. We call it the Internet of Things. But in 5 years, it'll just go back to being the internet again, because all the things will be connected. Sure, we will have light bulbs with IP addresses and refrigerators that will tell you when you're out of milk, and ovens that you can turn on before you leave work to have dinner ready when you get home. But we'll also have dash cams. They aren't just for cop cars anymore. Dash cams are already huge overseas, especially in China and Russia. Remember that meteor that crashed in Russia a few years back? Remember all those YouTube videos? They were all from dash cams. Within the next few years, dash cams will become standard operating equipment on new cars. Here in the U.S., they are already popular in taxi cabs. Soon they'll be mandated on all big trucks. Employers will install them on all company cars. You'll be able to review the video from your iPad when your car is parked in the garage and connected to your home Wi-Fi. You'll be able to cut and paste clips of accidents or police brutality or anything else you see on the road directly to YouTube. Luxury cars will have live streaming to the internet. You'll be able to keep tabs on your kids as they drive home from school, or watch your spouse as they commute home from work. You'll be able to watch the dash cam mounted in the FedEx truck as it carries the packages to your house. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I'm never going to want to watch video of a FedEx truck driving down the road. But in the words of that 1980s AT&T commercial, you will. And speaking of that FedEx truck, the man or woman who drives it will soon be out of a job, as will the Uber driver who brought you down here from the airport, or the pizza delivery guy who will most definitely be delivering pizza to the hotel lobby at 1 o'clock this morning. All of them will be out of a job within at least the next 10 years, possibly 5, as all of those drivers will be replaced with always-on, always-connected self-driving drones. Let's talk about life for a while, your life. Wristbands that tell you how many steps you've walked, or smartwatches that tell you how fast your heartbeat is, are only the beginning. Imagine a Bluetooth-enabled smart pill that connects to your watch, that then connects to your smartphone and takes pictures of your intestines that you can then share on Facebook. I know what you're thinking, gross. I would never. But, in the words of that 1980s AT&T commercial, you will. All of these new things are coming, and we will still grappling with how we properly tell people things are broken. In the beginning, there was full disclosure, and we liked it. But now, if you try to disclose anything, you may be hit with a DMCA violation, or a CFAA violation, or simply a lawsuit, or maybe just threatened with 30 years in jail. The process has become so complicated that there is now an entire industry surrounding something as simple as telling the truth. Do we really want to go back to the free-for-all days of full disclosure? Maybe we need to. If we don't figure out the answer to disclosure and its cousin, the sale of vulnerabilities, the Wassenaar Agreement and other laws like it may make up our mind for us. Over the past several years, the information security industry has exploded from a small group of loose-knit hackers who all knew each other to an industry of millions of wannabe professionals vying for a speaker slot at the world-renowned Black Hat briefings or DEF CON. Our little universe has suddenly become saturated by newcomers with their newly minted CISSPs that want to make a name for themselves and stake a claim to the high salaries that come with that notoriety. The information security industry is currently valued at over $100 billion. If you remember from earlier in the talk, that's the size of 5 targets. Those of us who are truly hackers, who live and breathe and love in little high and low pulses of electrons, those of us who understand when things break and break things to understand them, we need to speak up. It is our voices that should be heard by lawmakers before they write their next piece of cyber legislation. Fear of the hacker must be defeated. The only way to defeat that fear is with truth. A voice of reason should come from all corners, from everyone in this room. Do not leave your voice in the hands of others. Do not allow your voice to be co-opted by someone else's agenda. Blog, tweet, YouTube, whatever it takes for your voice to be heard. However faint that voice may be, add your voice to the multitude, and a chorus shall arise from the intertubes, and fear shall shrink away. Thank you. Enjoy the con.